Kamal is a tool for deploying your web applications anywhere. Whether you're deploying to a cloud VM or to your own servers or to a tiny little Pi computer in your closet, you can use Kamal. Kamal simply asks that you give it a handful of IP addresses for the servers you want to deploy to. Those servers don't have to be set up in any special way in advance. Kamal will take care of all of that, including installing Docker. And that's exactly what Kamal sits on top of. It is basically just Docker underneath that Kamal controls to deploy your application, to ensure that any updates happen completely gapless, no 500 errors to be thrown. It does this by putting a proxy in front of your applications as you swap them back and forth. It all happens without you having to do pretty much anything about it. Kamal controls all parts of the equation. Kamal 2 is now also capable of terminating SSL and automatically configuring those certificates using Let's Encrypt. You can also deploy multiple applications on a single server. And of course, you can also deploy to a bunch of different servers. That's what we do at 37 Signals for all of our deployments, including things like hey.com. And that was where Kamal was originally extracted. We wanted to move all of our stuff out of the cloud onto our own servers, and we created Kamal to do just that. All of our applications were already running in containers, so it wasn't exactly a big leap to deploy them by ourselves using Kamal, using Docker. And we felt we didn't really need anything else, and that many other folks would be in the same boat, that they would find something like Kubernetes too complicated or other solutions simply wanting. We've created Kamal exclusively for the purpose of deploying web applications and keeping them up to date with as little hassle as possible, yet still being completely full-featured. We do things like asset bridging to ensure there's no 404 errors as you switch from one version of your application to the next. We have accessories so that you could use Kamal to even deploy and control database servers. Kamal was originally created to work for Rails applications, but Kamal is really a general purpose tool that you can use to deploy any type of web application that can be containerized, which is really all of them. So I'll start my example showing you how to do this with a very basic Hello World Go application. Let's get to it. All right, let's have a look at an incredibly basic Go application that simply says hello world. This is one of the things I really like about Go. You can say hello world in almost no work at all. And this is what we're doing here in this single Go file we have set up in this directory, starting a server on port 80 and listening to everything, not just the root, but all paths below. That's, by the way, important. Make a note of that because Kamal uses /up as the health check. So your application must respond 200 OK to /up. We do that automatically here because we serve everything on all paths with the hello world and 200 OK. So that's a simple application here in Go, and the Docker file is almost as simple. It simply has a build stage that will compile the application, and then it will copy it into our container on app, exposing port 80 and starting that application that we just built. So what we can do is we can start here by simply building that application or building the Docker image for that application we have right here. I'm calling it Kamago, and we're just going to build that. It goes really quickly. It is a tiny Docker file, and we're already done. So now that we've built it, we can run it here, and I am going to map port 80 to 8080, and then let's get it running. If we jump over in the browser here and I have a look at 8080, you can see I'm running my application. So this is about as simple as it gets, but this is just enough and everything we needed to get going with Kamal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do Kamal init, and that is going to copy over all the configuration files that we need for the setup, including a set of lifetime hooks we can look at. So let's jump back into NeoVim here, and we will hop into our config, and you can see there's a deploy file. Now, this deploy file has a few things that you need to replace. One is the name of your service. We're going to call it Kamago. It uses that to identify the different containers as they run on your setup. We will rename it here as well, Kamago. And then we need to replace my user. My user is the Namespace for the image, it is also what the register uses to log in. So let's change that to my username, and we have one more here down here under the registry. By default, we are set up to use Docker Hub, but you can of course use your own registry of any kind on DigitalOcean or GitHub or wherever you want to do it. Now we're going to specify the server we're going to deploy to. And I am going to use my demo server here that's running on exitsoftware.io. And we would like to have SSL set up, yes, that allows for the auto certifications through Let's Encrypt. And we need a host name for that to work as well. I have already set up the host name kamago.exit.io to point to that demo server, so we can simply use that and roll off the way. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that the registry, of course, needs a password, and that password is being plucked out of the secrets. They're going to be here under .kamal, and you can see here under secrets. We have a bunch of different ways we can get these secrets to be available to Kamal. I'm using the very simplest, the default here, which is simply to pluck it out of the local machine's env. But you can read straight out of a file, or you can do what most people will do and what we do for example, deploying, hey, we set it up with a vault, a secrets vault. We're using 1Password at 37 signals. Here is the setup where you would plug those secrets out from a vault and extract them and then assign them to the secrets that Kamal are going to use for deploy. But as I said, we're just going to plug it out at the end. We are going to rely on that, and we're building here on an AMD 64, that is x86 processor. That's what we're going to deploy to. So this is basically all I need to set up. So if we save this file and we hop back out and do Kamal setup, it will connect to this server that is essentially wiped at this stage. I have a clean demo server for us to use. It'll check that Docker is already installed. Well, first, I'm obviously going to connect to it with SSH. This is, by the way, quite important. This is the first thing you need to do when you set up a new server. You need to exchange SSH keys and then turn off password access such that no one can access your server except by SSH keys. So this is a good point. I cannot deploy just yet because we have not committed all of this to Git. And Git is what we use to get the version for our application. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do git init, and then I'm going to do git add everything, and then I'm going to commit everything with the first deploy here. That will mean that we are now ready to run Kamal setup, and we will actually have the version, the reference that we can deploy with. As you can see here, the first thing we do is we build the image, putting it into a container image, and then we push that to Docker Hub. It goes very quickly. And then we pull that image down on the remote server. It'll pull it off Docker Hub there. All the setup and exchange of keys is already set up through those Kamal secrets that we had, the Kamal registry password. It'll start the servers. It'll first check if anything is running. It'll start the proxy in case that is not running already, as it wasn't. And voila, in 39 seconds, we have deployed everything. Let's go check and see if that is live at kamago.exitsoftware.io. It is hello world here. Everything is working. If we jump back into our application now, we could change it here to say hello world times 2. Save that, jump back out, commit an update, and then we can do Kamal deploy. Kamal deploy is not going to do any of the setup activities. It is simply going to compile the changes that we have to our Docker image, which will go even faster because now we have all those lovely layer caches we can lean on. It will compile it in, what did it say, 6 seconds here to get it all pushed out. It'll push it back up to Docker Hub, pull it onto the new server, and pull it back there. And then the proxy will do its magic. If this was a real application and we had a ton of traffic going into it, it would first start the new version of the application, check that that was sound, and then not switch over until it was, making sure that you would have no dropped connections in between the two updates. If we load here, we are running version 2, and that is basically all there is to it. Now let's try to make a more substantial demo. I'm going to create a new Rails 8 application called Alpha, and we're going to run it with the MySQL database. Normally, I would just use SQLite if we're deploying to a single server, but because we're going to set this up with multiple servers, including an independent database server in this example, we are going to use MySQL. But before we get going with the multiple servers, I'm going to deploy this new application alongside our Go application on the same server. That is one of the new things in Kamal 2, that we can deploy to the same server multiple apps and just route it on the host name. It's really simple to do. But this Rails application needs to do something, and we are going to give it a scaffold interface. This is the same scaffold interface I've done about 1 million times. It's going to have a post with a title and a body that is text. We are going to migrate that and create our schema files, and then we are going to have a look at this. The first thing we need to do is have a look at the routes here, make sure that the routes on the root is routed to our new scaffold correctly. And now we're actually set to test if all this works. Let's do that. Let's do a bin dev to start up our development server. Let's hop over here in our browser and look at local 3000. As you can see here, this is the standard setup for a scaffold interface in Rails. Everything is working just fine. So let's hop back out and go back to looking at the application itself, because the main file we need to change here is, as we did in the Go example, we need to look up our deploy file. And it's already filled out here in Rails. It's coming a little better pre-baked than it is straight out of Kamal, because of course we know that you are running a Rails application. But we still need to change some of the same things, like we need to change your username. I'm gonna go back here to do my username for the image, and the same thing for the registry. We have the same Kamal registry password. We're pulling out of env, so nothing has really changed there. We are going to run this with the same proxy too, except we are going to give it a different host name. This is going to be exitsoftware.io. We're going to deploy it to the same demo server that we had, which lives on demo.exitsoftware.io. And then let's scroll down here and see what else we got. We got the fact that the Rails master key is being injected as a secret by default. We are running the job server here in Puma. That's just how Rails 8 is already set up. We can actually toggle this off so we get a little more information when we look at things. And here are a couple of other new features from Kamal 2. These are things called aliases, where you can then just do Kamal console and you get a Rails console instead of having to write out all these options, the fact that it needs to be an interactive and reused container and all that stuff. We are again just building for AMD 64. We don't need to pass anything in. What we are going to do though is we're going to set up accessories. And accessories are a way for Kamal to allow you to run things like a database server. We're going to host this on the same box, at least for the moment here. We're going to host it on Exit Software IO. And then for the port, there's something interesting. If we just leave it like this, 3306, it's going to open that port to the whole world. That's actually not what we want with this application, where the database is running alongside the app service itself. We want it only to be accessible on localhost. So Docker can do that too. You simply map it to 127.0.0.1 and then do the port. Then you're going to get that port opening just on localhost instead of the entire world. That's quite helpful. It's also set up here that you could do your custom configuration. We're not going to use that. We are just going to use the default configuration for MySQL. And then we have to set up the production SQL file that will load the initial enter point when the MySQL server is first set up. We'll set that up in 1 second. We could also have set up Redis here, but we're not going to use that in this example. If we do go back up here, though, we do need to change the database host. So we can change that, and now we're going to rely on yet another new aspect of Kamal 2, which is the fact that Kamal will create its own internal network. So instead of referring to this with an external IP address, we can refer to it with its logical name, which is going to be alpha alpha-db. Where does it get that from? It gets the DB from the name of the accessory, and it gets the alpha from the name of the service. So this is how you can essentially set things up to be quarantined per application, but still having multiple of them running on the same server. We're going to hop in here and have a look at the database YAML file as well. Let's close this. And you can see here we are set up to use a root password. That's actually correct for what we're going to use right now. And then normally in a real production app, you'd set up a custom user for this database. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to rely on the root user. And then we're going to rely on the fact that we need a password here. And that password is something we're going to shove into the secrets file. You see, we already have the Kamal registry password here. We're going to do the database password as well. And in a real app, again, you're going to want to use one of the proper ways of doing this, either storing this in something like 1Password or storing it in env or pulling it from a file. You're definitely not going to encode it right here, but I'm going to do that anyway, just for demo purposes. So it's going to be MySQL root password. This is absolutely not something you should do for real. That's going to be our password. Isn't that great? Now, that password is going to be injected into the setup here so that we can refer to it down for the setup in the database accessory. It's going to pull this password and it's going to essentially seed the database that is going to be the root password, and we're just going to refer to that root password in all the cases. So we're going to have to parse or pass that in to our Rails application as well, such that that has access to the MySQL root. Not root host, root password. And we are going to use that in the database YAML file here instead of this alpha database password. We're going to do the MySQL root password. Now we have everything set up to be able to refer to each other. And then, as I said, we actually do need to just set up a initializer file for our database. We're going to call that production.sql. And in that, you need to do create database and then the different databases that you need. We have one database that's called Alpha Production. That's great. We need that. And then we also need one that is Alpha Production Cache, and we need one that is Alpha Production Queue, and we need one that is Alpha Production Cable. Where are all these coming from? This is Rails stuff. It is coming out here. You can see we have a cable schema, cache schema, what else have you, and they're all defined in our database YAML file. Production has a primary database, that's the one we just set up, along with a cache, queue, and cable. All right, so we have now 4 databases we're going to set up. They're going to be set up with this MySQL root password, and we're going to create them all when this is all initially set up, and we are going to deploy it to the existing server on demoexitsoftware.io. We're going to run with SSL in front of it, and we are going to deploy this. I think this is everything we need. Well, the first thing we do need is actually, let's start a new terminal here. We are going to need to check all this stuff into Git. When you generate a new Rails application, it's already been Git initialized, but we need to add everything to it, and then we need to commit everything as first. All right, that should make us ready to do Kamal setup. And Kamal setup is going to set up not only the application itself, it's also going to set up that accessory, that database accessory. You can see here it's setting up the AlphaDB data. You get to see everything that basically goes on with Kamal because we output all the operations that Kamal perform when you run things like Kamal setup or you run Kamal deploy. You see here now we're running and setting up the database. We are then going to build our Rails application from scratch. We're going to build that Docker container image, and we're going to push it up to Docker Hub, just like we were doing with the Go example, and then we're going to pull it down on the server. And then these two applications will live side by side on the same server. They're being routed by that proxy host configuration, so we can have them both live on the server at the same time. It's one proxy, multiple applications, and that's really neat. Now, once this is all set up, we will take it one step further and we will move beyond my little dedicated demo server, and we're going to set up some cloud VMs on Hetzner to show you how you can deploy the same application to an entirely new setup using almost all the same configuration, only changing the things that actually do change. So here we have the deployment is finished in 84 seconds. That's not bad for building everything from scratch. Let's now hop over and see if this was actually real. We're going to go to alpha exit software.io. Here we have our real application. We can do hello world, hello, and you can see it is all successful. It is saving to the database. Everything is up and running. Wonderful. And we can check that we still have our old application, our Go application, running on the same server on Kamago, hello world, ×2. Wonderful. Now, let's set up some cloud VMs. I'm going to use Hetzner here for that. We're going to set up 3 different servers. They're all going to run Ubuntu. I'm just going to use some shared vCPUs here. Look at these amazing prices. I'm going to use the smallest box I can get for this setup. I'm going to have my SSH key already configured for those boxes, and that's about it. Let's name them something like Alpha Web 1 and then make 3 of them. We're going to call the last one though Alpha DB1. All right. Creating these, setting these up. And as these are being set up, we also need a load balancer because now we have 2 application servers. We have Web 1 and we have Web 2, and we need to expose them as a single IP address that we can route things to. And we can do that as a load balancer. I'll go in here and create that load balancer if I can get these out of the way. All right, we're going to put it in the same region. You can see we already have 3 servers available in this network zone. We're just going to use the smallest one. We don't really even need anything but the target. We're going to declare the 2 alpha webs, Web 1 and Web 2. We are going to it's going to do all that. Yeah, that's fine. We're going to have /up be our health check for these servers, just like Kamal itself would use. They're just going to be round robin, and let's call that alpha LB. Great. So that's set up as well. Now, it's going to cook. It's going to get all configured up, but we have our 3 servers. So let's set up our application to actually use these servers. If I hop back in here and go back to our setup, we have our deploy file. We are going to create an additional deploy file. So this is one of the really nice features of Kamal. You can have multiple destinations. So if we take this deploy YAML file and we copy it over to be deploy hetzner.yaml, we now have a new file that we can change for the things that change, but we don't need all the things that did not change. So let's first get rid of all of that. And now, interestingly enough here, we are not going to need the proxy because we are going to terminate SSL behind Cloudflare once we set everything up. So let's turn off this proxy. By default, it is actually off, but because everything depends or inherits from deploy YAML where we turned it off, we need to explicitly turn it off. Let's also change these. These are not false. All this registry stuff is exactly the same. We are going to change the env though, so let's leave that be exactly the DB host here. That's going to change. And the aliases, we don't need to change those. We're not going to change the volume. We're not going to change the asset path or the builder, any of this stuff. We can really just boil it down. We are going to change though the accessory. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do is set up which web servers we're deploying to. And let's go over here and copy Web 1, the IP address for that. Hop back in. Great. We're going to copy over the other one as well. That's Web 2. Great. Now we have those. We can copy over the database. Let's see, where do we have that? First of all, we need to set it up here for the host. We need to set that up for the host, and we need to have it one more time for the host here. Delete to the end of the line there. And then on this one, we are actually going to set it up as a public port. Now, when you do that, obviously you need a firewall or something else in front that ensures that only those two web servers are actually able to have access to the database setup. But otherwise, all of this stuff is the same. The database host now is the only thing that we changed. We still need everything else. We need the secrets, and that's basically it. Actually, we do need to set up one more thing. We need to have the secret set up. So the secrets might have changed. We can actually change this to common, I believe, but we can also just have an example here showing you how you can have secrets per deployment. And if we set that up, we're actually going to use the same MySQL. Everything is going to be the same. So you could do .common and you could share that file, but if you have them dedicated to each destination, this is how you would set that up. All right, I think we now have everything that we need to deploy our new setup to our new servers that are running on Hetzner. Oh, the host is actually going to change, not in the original deploy file, but in our new setup. Actually, no, we don't need to set up the host. The host is actually only something you need when you are using the proxy and you are using it to run multiple applications on a single server, or you're using it to procure that SSL certificate. Otherwise, we can just point to it from afar. So let's check in our two new changes here, and then everything is going to get deployed. Set up Hetzner as the as second destination. Great. All right. Now we're ready to deploy our application to this new Hetzner setup. So we're going to do Kamal setup -d for destination, HTC to match the name we gave that destination. And then we are essentially going to run everything through from scratch. These are brand new Ubuntu procured setups that have nothing on them. So the first thing that Kamal does is to check whether they have Docker, which they do not. So they have to get Docker installed, and we will do that automatically. That happens as part of the Kamal setup process, where everything is checked, that we need the prerequisites that we have. And as you can see, that takes about 20 seconds on the first deploy. Then we log into Docker to be able to pull our Docker Hub image in just a second. And as you can see here, we still create that Kamal network on all of the setups, even if we don't actually need to refer to an internal accessory in this case. Then we're going to build the container image. Again, one more time, you can see there's actually some of these layers that have already been cached. This is one of those really wonderful things about Docker, that it has layer caching. It really speeds things up, and you see we're able to just build the whole thing in 14 seconds with those layers cached. Now the image is being pulled on all our three servers. It's going to be pulled on Web 1, 2, and the DB1 server that we set up. Everything is going to be booted on those servers with that image. I suppose on the accessory server, on the DB server, we're going to boot MySQL on its own server instead of what we were doing before, where we were booting it on the same server as we were deploying everything else to. All right, so now in 88 seconds, we have set up a dedicated server for MySQL, 2 of these web app servers, and now we can go back here and check if our load balancer is ready. It's going to have this IP address. It probably won't be ready for a few seconds because it pings every 10, 15 seconds, something like that. But while it's getting ready, let's go into Cloudflare, which is where I'm managing my domain. And we're going to set up a new record. It's going to be an A record for Bravo, which is what we're going to call the destination for this deployment. And we're going to use the IP address of the load balancer. And we're going to set it up as being proxy. That means Cloudflare is going to terminate the SSL. It's also going to be doing CDN work. It's a really nice setup to have it like this. All right, so now we have Bravo being proxy to the load balancer, and look and behold, our load balancer is healthy and it's ready to go. So let's see if it all works. Bravo exit software.io. Wonderful. Now we have a 2 web app server setup that is running with a dedicated database. and it is running by itself. And by the way, we still, of course, have our own setup of the same application running on Alpha, and we can deploy back and forth between these two things. So now we have two deployments of this same application, and we can do a few Kamal things, like we can look at the logs for the Hetzner setup. That's going to show us that index controller we just accessed there. What else can we do? We can do things like we can access the console, which is going to grab the first of our web servers and give us a console for Rails. And what do we have here? Let's see if we can load that first post. You can see, there we have it. We could even update that post and set a new title. Let's do changed from console. Let's hop back and see that that actually took effect. It did, changed from console right here. This is Kamal. You are able to run it first on a single box, either with just something like SQLite or using an accessory with the existing Kamal network to all have it operate inside of itself, or you can set it up with multiple servers like we just did in this example. And of course, it's very easy to expand that. You can add as many servers as you want. You can start classifying different types of servers. You could have job servers running something like SQL jobs, as we do in Rails now with solid queue. You have a ton of options. We can configure how many processes we want to run on each server. You have all the power of Kamal right at your fingers for any type of application, all the way from a Go Hello World to a full 3-tier Rails application with 3 different servers. It's pretty amazing. It'll work great on cloud VMs. It'll work great on a dedicated box. It'll work great on your own hardware. You just go in and add a second destination, or you change your deploy YAML file to be the new destination. If we were to move this to DigitalOcean, I would just change these IP addresses and I would run Kamal setup -d DigitalOcean, and I would be up and running on the new server immediately. This is the power of Kamal. It's pretty incredible. I hope you enjoy it.